Sanctuary trauma style injuries. Explain that one.
Can I trust my workplace to keep me safe? Can I trust my supervisors? Can I trust my colleagues? There's emotional needs in the workplace that often aren't seen.
Great company culture and environment doesn't come from Friday afternoon barbecues. It's how your employees feel on Sunday night before Monday morning.
The sanctuary traumatized them by letting them down.
Psychological health and safety is this beautiful thing. We know what physical health and safety is. Psychological health and safety. Work and life don't exist in a vacuum. Our work impacts our mental health and psychological wellness at work and outside of work. Can my work be part of adding to my wellness?
I don't feel safe at work, Jim. What does this mean?
Don't feel safe at work. What does this mean to somebody? Quinn, what an amazing question to consider in this uncertain environment we're in. Workplaces are uncertain, global uncertainty, personal uncertainty. And this means that person who doesn't feel safe at work will very likely have less loyalty, less job engagement, a heightened amount of sick days, more conflict at work, lower productivity at work. They're going to lose sleep at home. It's going to affect trickle-down family. That safety is a human need we must have to stay healthy in the workplace and outside. Psychological health and safety in the workplace has been dealing with this. However, it's becoming very distressing to hear how many people have that concern over their workplace safety, because it filters into everything in one's life. And it often leads to higher use of substances. It leads to less upward mobility. And that ongoing question of, can I trust my workplace to keep me safe? Can I trust my supervisors? Can I trust my colleagues? And I've seen lots of them. I've been in them and supported leadership training as well as employee training to try to develop this safety that we need. And one of the questions, Quinn, could you imagine if you and me and every one of us, we had no question of safety, no question of trust, no question of uncertainty, no question that our identity was going to be trampled on when we went to work? How good would it be going to work?
So when someone says I don't feel safe at work, obviously that could have many different meanings and different connotations. I think when people think of safety at work, they think of occupational health and safety in terms of, not slipping and falling. It's more the physical side of things, but safety at work can have, and I think you've covered some of them, but let's go through that again in terms of what that can mean, especially when you have, a diverse workplace. You're going to have male and female, you're going to have young and old, you're going to have people with different needs and accommodations for them that need to be provided. So when we say, I don't feel safe at work, what might that mean in different contexts?
Different context. Let's imagine a large corporate environment as a context. Let's imagine that first, and maybe a labor environment. Then fairly popular environment where we hear the question, I don't feel safe at work, is the caring and healthcare industry as well. So in the context of a corporate environment where people don't feel safe, because there's heightened competition, which is a high stress, it develops high stress in individual competition as well. So the threat response rises up in that environment, which prevents an individual from using open communication with the colleagues, and they have a harder time asking questions when they feel like they don't understand a project or plan, or if they see something wrong or have made a mistake. And people have a more difficult time sharing that with their leaders. And people feel like they're always at risk of being marginalized as a complainer or low productivity employee, and then missing out on upward or forward mobility, if you want, in their workplace. And that's kind of a corporate snapshot. I'm going to show you some stats in just a moment here that might answer some of that as well. If we look at the labor level of work, I worked among crews where it was all males, and you did too, and particularly in your sports career. And there was always that friendly banter that occurred, and it was often intended friendly, but Quinn, if I was in a football locker room with you, y'all don't know what I went through last weekend. That banter sometimes has a bite to it that makes an individual feel unsafe. And we see this similar pattern in labor environments where it's traditional male-dominated labor environments.
Yeah.
And more so as females are coming in, it's needing to change, where we are having a hard time caring for the emotional needs of each other in the appropriate emotional needs within a workplace for that safety, and that I can trust my coworker to not denigrate or undignify me if I float an idea that sounds a little crazy perhaps, but I'm thinking, hey, let's chat about this. And then a barb comes firing at me. Oh, come on, Brayshaw, that's ridiculous. How can you be so stupid? That'll never work. And those things, that's the safety that's being cut out of workplaces, and we're trying to see it get introduced back in. Healthcare. The safety comes with a lot of overwork, too many hours, and the high risk of an action that might be more leading to a mistake that could cause harm to someone. And that psychological safety, it's kind of a concert in that realm where we need our coworkers and colleagues, leaders and managers to understand we all have emotional needs. And I'm going to use that term. It's not that real deep emotional need, but there's emotional needs in the workplace that often aren't seen. And therefore, people that are doing the work in those environments are feeling less safe because we know that we're not going to feel cared for by the people who are supposed to care for us. I'm going to close this part of my comments on it, and this is leading to a lot of sanctuary trauma style injuries in our workplaces and even some moral injuries in our workplaces.
Sanctuary trauma style injuries. Explain that one.
Well, here's the best example of that, and it comes through the service personnel in military. The soldier goes off to a new land to protect our land and to aid that land they're in, and it's intense. They come back, they are ill, perhaps physically injured, maybe psychologically injured. The organization said, we will take care of you. And what happens after that is they're not taken care of in some instances. So their sanctuary agreed to do something for them in a way that was going to keep them well, abandoned that commitment. Therefore, the sanctuary traumatized them by letting them down, to cut it really concise, the term.
Would you imply then that all workplaces now become sanctuaries, like a corporate, corporation, corporate environment? Like, should that still be considered a sanctuary for their employees?
My belief in that is yes, and a lot of that is related, Quinn, to the fact that you and I probably don't know a corporate environment where there's not corporate core values, right? Trust, safety, honesty, respect, people matter, whatever they are. Yeah. Now, just if you think of it from the Quinn Magnuson Corporation that's running this podcast, you have a family home you live in, and it's the exact same thing we expect. Sorry, I'm not going to say exact. It's a very similar thing that we expect in our workplaces. Display, we're going to keep you safe in all these ways, including psychologically, and then don't do it. And it's rarely intentional. It's just often what's known to be ethical fade of the organization's leadership in some levels, where ethic is to support you by showing you respect and dignity and building trust. But when we don't actually bring that to fruition in our corporate organization, your expectation now is damaged, and it can lead to sanctuary trauma.
I shared this with you the other day. I saw a LinkedIn post, and it was great company culture and environment doesn't come from Friday afternoon barbecues and extra bonuses and overtime. It's how your employees feel on Sunday night before Monday morning. And that hit different. But I know that there are people out there that would say, well, people just need to, develop a thicker layer of skin. They need to not be so soft. But what do you do in that situation where there's people taking advantage of the everybody needs to be psychologically safe environment philosophy?
I would like to answer your question. I want to start by just showing a few statistics about what the workplace is, because the answer is getting adopted more and more by individuals. So if we consider that 70% of people have experienced work stress in the last month. We know stress is experienced, but that's referring to that level of stress that's difficult for a person to process. People are feeling the world to be unsafe as well, along with that. Like 34% of us feel less safe than today than we did 5 years ago. 54% anticipate there's a significant degree of instability, global catastrophes. So this is happening in relation to the workplace, the stresses that are occurring related to lower psychological health and safety. In the workplace specific, Quinn, 43% were uncertain if they told their employer about a mental health condition, what the impact would be on them. And 1 in 7 people were uncertain about their psychological safety at work. If you think of a coffee table at the workplace with 7 people, at least one of them is feeling that type of way. And now what we know to find the balance, to answer your question, if we want to support people who have physical and psychological beings that both need to be taken well care of, we want to support them in the psychological aspects. We will gain higher productivity. We will gain more engagement, more loyalty. We'll gain less conflict in the workplace, less absenteeism, less presenteeism in the workplace. We'll gain a better reputation for the organization because of the, it's called discretionary effort that Quinn takes beyond this is what's required of you, Quinn, but you'll use some discretionary effort to even go beyond that when you've got a good, supportive, psychologically safe workplace. It doesn't have to be a country club. And if we can look at it as 2 prongs, is Brayshaw or Magnuson, are they just crappy employees? Or maybe Jim's going through something with his relationship or his child's health or his parents in the sandwich generation, and it's caused strain on him psychologically, and it is filtering into work, but can we in some way nourish Jim in that and work with Jim to bring that standard of productivity back where Jim feels best at? Because I don't feel good when my standard drops down because I'm unwell. So it doesn't become a country club. It becomes a supportive environment that benefits everyone, including the bottom line dollar.
So for all the people listening out there, what are the trademarks of a psychologically safe work environment? What are the common trademarks that we see in that type of environment? And I guess my second question to that is, does it get harder to maintain that as the company gets larger?
It does get harder to monitor if we're maintaining it. But when we develop the core aptitudes in what's known as the psychological health and safety in the workplace standard. Now, this is a standard, and these are the 13 factors. I'll just mention some of them, and you can point out any one you like, Quinn. But in 2013, the CSA and the Mental Health Commission of Canada collaborated with many stakeholders, and they developed a psychological health and safety in the workplace standard. It's gone global. It's used in many, many countries. And there's another an ICS, an international classification standard, that is also mirroring this standard. And it's called the standard in North America. And when you talk about the things that identify it, so the 13 psychosocial or psychological factors for a psychologically healthy and safe workplace include healthy organizational culture, include social, here I'm going to enlarge that for your audience so they can see that if that's all right, psychological and social support, clear leadership and expectations. And I'll just read them all once, and then you can pick away at some of them if you want. Civility and respect, psychological demands, growth and development, recognition and reward, involvement and influence, workload management, engagement, balance, psychological protection, and protection of physical safety. And I will finish that read by saying, in 74 and 76, when legislation for physical safety and health standards entered Canada, came through the States into Ontario, and then I think 76, we received the legislation in Canada. Then it went provincial. We've done great at that. So this standard that's only 10 years old is being implemented in many ways, as we have to keep our people not just physically safe, but psychologically safe too. That has a very huge cost, and we don't.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought the stat up of like the occupational health and safety, like the falls and the physical side of things only really being incorporated in the 70s, and now we're 50 years later, and this being implemented only a decade ago. We're still potentially a generation or two from this just becoming the norm. Having said that, I do feel like a lot of companies are realizing that this is the key to longevity of their employees, which is a problem these days in workplaces, people jumping from job to job. It keeps employees loyal if they do feel safer at a place that they work, but also it the studies are showing that it contributes to the bottom line. Like you said, more productivity obviously creates more efficiencies, creates more profitability, and ultimately everybody in the company benefits from this. So the two that seem to be really prominent when I think of the workplace today is 6 and 7: growth and development, and recognition and reward. And I think it's important. I think it's very, very important to acknowledge people for what they've contributed. And I even preach effort over results. I think people should be rewarded for effort, not just necessarily the big project win or the contract being signed. Which one do you think is potentially the most important one for companies to look at next?
Great question. So if we had global cutbacks and we had to reduce some of these 13 factors because we could only pick one or two, that's all we can afford now. Which one would we distill down to say, it's, this one is essential? I saw the dismantling of people's confidence, Quinn. I saw the dismantling of their engagement in work. I saw ethical fade. I saw lack of trust in leadership so frequently in some of the organizations we've worked with and where I've worked in my past. So for me, I'm so biased, but it is certainly, it's psychological and social support. Because when I go into my workplace and in fact, one of my earlier careers, I had stuff going on where it seemed like everybody was pointing at me for something, a belief-based, a value-based choice I made in my personal life. And my crew, they talked to me, said, Jim, like it's someone, we need to move someone downtown or and there's a lot of people there. How you feel? And I feel at risk is what I said. And my coworkers said, hey, we'll send one of our other guys. No question asked. I felt so psychologically and socially supported in that moment. Yeah. My whole appraisal of threat just went down, because when we have meaningful social connections with coworkers or personally, when you and I meet, I feel less threat about everything. Reduced appraisal of threat is so important for me right now, and it has been my whole career. So I choose number 2. We're keeping.
All right. I like that. Interesting thing about this topic, and then I want to get into, what you do for work when you present this with companies and the groups you work with. But this list could be applied to an educational environment, like a classroom. It can be applied to, like I said, a sports team. And that's something that I'm striving to work towards in getting the message out, is that even though I've worked in the corporate environment, the business environment for the last 20 years, all of this applies to, do you coach a youth sports team? Do you teach a class, of students? And I come from a teaching background. I taught high school for 5 years. And the topic, I have some regrets. I go back to when I was teaching, and you got to remember this is 20 years ago, but I probably didn't understand what that psychologically safe environment meant. As a new teacher, I just wanted to make sure everybody stayed in line and got their work done. And so I created probably a very high stress, intense environment where it's like, if you don't get your work done, Mr. Magnuson won't be happy. And I look back on this and in having this discussion with you today, even Jim, that I regret some of the ways I handled but you have a classroom of 35 students. It's very, and this is why I asked the question, as large places get, larger, more employees at workplaces, is it harder to maintain this? Same thing with 35, 15-year-olds in a classroom. How do you maintain psychological safety? How do you create that culture so that it almost just becomes part of the fabric of the workplace, of the classroom, of the team that you're playing on? Like, how does this get set up so that it just kind of just runs itself?
So the human condition takes over and it functions. There is a way that I'm starting to see some value and some really strong outcomes in. And Quinn, I'm glad that you explained a bit of that. That's number 5. You were just explaining the psychological demand for you to performance manage 24, 26, 28 students. You had to performance manage them. You did not. Maybe you could have if you really dug in somewhere deep inside of the Quinn Magnuson heart, but you did not have the cognitive or emotional capacity to manage all their psychological demands either. And how could you support that many the kids? And sadly, we missed summoning this from way back in our history as humans. And like you said, this just seems like it belongs everywhere. And we hear that so frequently when we're working with leadership groups, imagine a day-long session where we go through all the factors and have some application opportunities for them. And at the end, when the feedback comes in, few people are, well, isn't this just common sense? And we love hearing that, because you're right. It's like you just said, it belongs everywhere. And the reason why it is common sense for some people, because they inherently have internal motivation versus external motivation. They automatically operationalize their core values, and that connects them to these psychosocial factors, because they're actually putting their core values into play daily, and it becomes automated for them to do so. So, and I think the question might be from you, what is operationalizing core values, if that's one of them? Quite simply, if you leave your workplace today and you ponder in any way your identity, I'm kind, I'm generous. And then the next stage of that is for you, this is an individual operationalizing their own core values, taking personal pride in, work today, when Jim was having a real challenge with understanding that project, you, my supervisor, you may have been frustrated with me, but you displayed generosity to me by providing me more time, more insight. And that's operationalizing your core value. That kind of operationalizing core values needs to happen in all levels or workplaces, so that we can automate the psychological health and safety by just our natural human condition.
I would say that, psychological safety at work and productivity at work come from employees and employers alike, everybody within that workplace trusting each other. Same goes for sports. Same for a lot of, like, even in the family dynamic, it comes from trust, right? On the football field, I have to trust that the 11 players or 10 players around me on the field are going to do their job. We're all going to each do our job to be successful. And that's why I still argue that football is the greatest team sport on the planet. I've had some hockey fans challenge me on that. But in the workplace, if I don't, and I've said this myself out loud, I have a handful of people that I trust at the place that I work. And there's others that I don't neither distrust or trust. I don't have an opinion either way. For those people that you do trust, you feel like you can go to them. You feel like you can explore new ideas, be innovative. They make you feel like you can open your mouth, so to speak, and not be made fun of or chastised or shut down for your ideas. And so that lack of trust, and I want you to explore this, because we talked about this before the show. How does, when I say, where does lack of trust play within this ecosystem of psychological safety at work? I would imagine it's probably got to be number one.
Yeah. Where's all the trust gone, and how do we get it back? Because organizations are clamoring to restore trust. Yeah. We've had an immense barrage of uncertainty and global distress over the last 5 years. And now trust is at its all-time low. I see it starting to come back because organizations are being thoughtful. We frame it sometimes through where are we on the spectrum of trust with coworker Jim, colleague Quinn, manager Dave, CEO Cheryl. Where are we at our spectrum of trust? And do we trust these individuals? Do we trust the organization to take care of us? We talked about sanctuary trauma already. We're trying to find strength-based trust moments. Like you can trust something. And let me just enlarge this so I tell you about this. This is the spectrum of trust. And if you look on the left side, even when someone or something's lower on the spectrum of trust, there's never zero trust. Okay, it's never zero. Mm. And even when someone or something's high on the spectrum of trust, there's never 100% or complete trust. Trust can be found for everyone, everything. Part of the goal is asking someone, hey, is there something you can trust about your supervisor, Jim? I don't know, like I trust he'll wear pants to work. Okay, maybe that's all we can get. That's 1%. Yeah, that's right, 1%. Exactly. That's way down here.
Right.
And that's okay. But if you see in the middle the vagueness, this is what we fail to do. We fail to think of trust as a commodity that we have control over for how much we give and to take and receive. When we do consciously determining our level of trust for certain elements of our workplace, we then can build trust. Because we keep waiting for people to change so we trust them. And it isn't happening. We keep waiting for organizations to change so we trust them. So the strength-based trust building is we come up with thought about Who do I have highest trust in? Who do I have lowest trust in? Our globe was hit with high stress. When there's high stress for a little bit of time, trust goes down. But if we have high stress for a long amount of time and it keeps going, our oxytocin is diminished, our serotonin doesn't produce as much. We don't have endorphins and the healthy endogenous opioids when we have one-on-one interactions, because we're in a threat mode, and we then draw away socially, at least cognitively and emotionally, if not physically. And we can't have trust when that happens, when we're drawn away. So people are right to be wondering, where's the trust gone and how do we get it back? Uncertainty of if there's a low psychological health and safety in our environment, it is going to induce low trust, and everybody suffers.
Yeah. We chatted before the show and quote unquote the uncertainty epidemic. And that is something that, like you said, since COVID has eaten away at people's trust. It's now nobody trusts the media. Now nobody trusts health organizations. Nobody trusts educational institutions. We don't trust the financial institutions. It eroded our trust so badly over the last 5 years, and it's still happening, that it's created, like it says, an epidemic, but people are bringing that into the workplace, right? People are bringing that into their ecosystems, their work, their teams, their families, their, classrooms. I use all those arenas. So what does that mean? What is that uncertainty epidemic? What does it mean for the workplace? And are we turning a corner out of it, or are we still stuck?
Yeah, this force of uncertainty that you speak of, I like that you outlined so many things that we have less certainty about than we had 5 years ago. Like I haven't met anybody who feels more certainty about the future now in any way than they did 2 years ago. Even we can't even predict. You used to be able to predict the future a bit. In a year, the world will kind of be like this, but now we don't know what it's going to be like in a week. So attending to this force is essential, and the force of uncertainty, if you can imagine it, it's a cascade effect, because when we have a preference for control as humans, and the human control preference, it actually has a really large element in it that starts when we're little tiny babies. Over here in this corner, you'll see the baby. When we have less certainty and control, we demonstrate patterns of negative emotions in response, and the external things that have brought uncertainty upon each of us, and that combined with the uncertainty of, am I psychologically safe in my workplace? I maybe don't have enough leadership and expectations. I just don't know what the expectations are, so I have less certainty. So now there's an issue that happens with individuals, because you'll see here there's a threat response, and it disrupts what's called the human control preference. Tell me, Quinn, do you ever choose? I would choose not having control over this little thing or big thing versus having control over this little thing or big thing. And it's a control superpower in a sense. And right, even when we know how to navigate how to control and what we can control, and recognize that we have a preference for control as humans. And when that preference is threatened, once again, and this is not just about psychological safety, we are combining that element of our workplace with all the external uncertainties. And because uncertainty and trust are two sides of the same coin. So then we have different perceptions, right? More negative perceptions of the situation. My attention narrows, irritability goes up, greater fear happens, I got a sense of urgency. I got to get plot control back. There's stress hormone release. People are getting ill because of it. Immune system suppression. I now may be choosing maladaptive behaviors and coping mechanisms, so not healthy adaptations. Pain tolerance diminishes, and there's cautious communication. And I didn't put a slide in here for this last piece, but many of us know someone, Quinn, who's just been so fatigued and tired for the last 8 months, 12 months, 22 months. And what happens with these loads of uncertainty, low trust, low safety, is our mitochondria, the DNA, mitochondria, as you know, are the body's powerhouse cells. They actually have a damage on them that causes dysfunction of distribution of energy, which will affect cognition, and it affects emoting, and affects sleep, and affects all of those things.
It's wow. That list you just had up there was my resume for the past 45 years. And I say that jokingly, but it's true. Like the human control preference, everybody has a need for some level of control, some more than others. I'll put my hand up for that one. I need to control things. And that goes back to growing up in a family. My mom raised us on social assistance and growing up in poverty and not having control of our lives then, because obviously we were subordinate to everybody because we had no money. And growing up in that situation created in me a need for control. And I distinctly remember my mom's way to control, because she couldn't control the financial side of things. Her way of controlling was to clean incessantly. She was OCD when it came to cleaning, but that was the one thing she could control, right, Jim? And so that's what helped her manage the uncertainty, the irritability, the fear was, at least I can keep my home clean. Yeah, greater effort. Absolutely. And she passed that on to me and my brother and sister. And I'm learning just recently, like when I say recently, I'm 53, I'm saying in the last 3 to 5 years, that trying to control everything just makes things worse. It just causes more stress, more irritability. I don't need to control everything. I don't need to control my kids. I don't need to control, the family situation as much as I do, work situation. And I'm working on it still. It's still a work in progress. Decided to not control as much. Life's a little better. And yeah, it's amazing. But I think about people who, in a workplace situation, if they are outside of the workplace and they lack control there, and then they come to a workplace where they really have no control at all, psychological, unsafe, and so forth, it's just a downward spiral, which creates mental health problems. It's a bad spiral. When we talk about those initial feelings of uncertainty, which can exacerbate into potentially mental health, anxiety, depression, panic, there is that gap. And I think you called it the subclinical gap. It's like, okay, who do I turn to? Who can I talk to? What's the next step here? So let's talk about the subclinical gap and what that means in society today.
Subclinical gap, as you know a bit about it, and I've learned more about it for the last handful of years. This is why the epidemic is of uncertainty and mistrust, less so than mental health, because the numbers aren't changing, not improving, but there's something been missing. So now, goal was with the subclinical gap, if over here is where I'm well, okay, and then I go along my journey and I start to become unwell. And there's kind of a hockey stick eventually where up here now on a graph, if you can imagine a graph, I'm in crisis or sick. I now need clinical support.
Yep.
So in this period down here, when I started becoming unwell, if my coworker is going to give me some psychological and social support, that helps process the hormones and chemistry related to my unwellness developing. It also gives me a better potential for navigating my emotional sensations. It also reduces my threat response. And we've seen there's worldwide researchers, one of them is named Vikram Patel, and he's done research in this where it keeps people from ending up here in the crisis. Not only that, but like the therapists and counselors I've been to as well, I become unwell, stuff unravels. I go to my therapist or counselor. I'm not in crisis, but it's intense. And then my next appointment is when? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a month. Rarely does a person go week after week. So in the subclinical gap, we have lay people who have some understanding of wellness and mental health training or understanding. They are now going to be in that subclinical gap to support the work that the clinicians are doing over here and prevent the individual from experiencing more deficit in the meantime, in many cases, because there is no panacea stronger than social support.
I think it's important to make the distinction between a neural rut and a neural groove. And the two have very different purposes. In fact, we don't think about what we're doing. It's automatic, and that's what's known as a neural rut. Sometimes it's referenced as a neural groove when it's a positive thing. Overarching theme is to keep you alive, not to keep you happy.
Explain neural rut and how it affects people potentially mentally or even physically.
Yeah. So by way of example, Quinn, I know you're an awesome singer. If I was to sing the song with you, get your motor running, get out on the, what word is it? Instant.
Wait,
Yeah.
highway.
So that's it. Yeah, exactly. And I love your singing voice. But
Oh,
the neural rut. You didn't have to think about it. It was automated and it happened. And there was no harm to that kind of a neural rut or a neural groove. Our brain's job is to keep us alive, not keep us happy. So it's always trying to create the most efficient pathway to complete its task.
hmm.
And it often results in negative outcomes. So if we look at some of these statements about the neural, our brain creates pathways, the grooves for repeated thoughts and behaviors. And it's a worn out road. It's that path. When you went to university and there was sidewalks around the area, but grass across the middle of the area, right? Path got worn across the middle
Yep.
because it was shorter, quicker, more efficient. This is what happens to our brain. We wear a path in certain ways. And the habitual thinking and acting, it even when it's no longer helpful or beneficial, starts to occur. We see this for driving behaviors. We see this for language behaviors. We see this for emotion responses as well. When people instantly move to anger or instantly move to contempt, these are pathways that have occurred in people's brains. And proves some of it may be related to historical exposures to traumas. But the fact is, when we don't have time to or incentive to identify what am I doing automated that might be less beneficial than it could be if I were to re-encode a new pathway, and it's not hard to do. These ruts happen without us knowing, and they're good for us because they're saving energy for the brain, which is trying to keep us alive.
So would this be, and I think I know the answer to this, but is being in a neural rut also the same as having beliefs that you are hard set on and you will argue and debate your beliefs against someone who challenges those beliefs? Is that the same as neural rut?
Is very, very much the same, because the two things about beliefs is that beliefs are connected with emotion, which strengthens the pathway as well. The pathway becomes more concise. And when one challenges a belief, the one who believes it also senses a threat. There's a threat response because nobody prefers to be wrong. And when my belief is being challenged by someone, the instant interpretation in the human condition is, I'm wrong, there's a threat, I got to push back. And so that also solidifies that neural.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Carol Dweck's growth mindset. This is what the effort over results philosophy is based around, is the concept of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I would suggest that then a fixed mindset, which basically implies that it is either an individual who feels that they have a limited talent, limited intellect, it can't be increased. I'm always going to be a ditch digger. I'm always going to be an average hockey player. That's a fixed mindset. Teachers, employers can have fixed mindsets about their employees. Their fixed mindset might be, yeah, this person's always just going to be in the back coding. They're never going to be a full-fledged engineer. Let's pigeonhole it. Well, growth mindset, which Dweck espoused, basically is, I may not be good at something, but with time and resources and effort, I can increase my knowledge, increase my ability, increase my skill in that particular task or that particular, whatever the venture it is that I'm in. So I feel like that's what, when you explain neural rut, is people get so stuck in the same way of thinking, and the only way out of that is education. And I don't mean formally in university. I'm just saying it's just learning. It's just constantly keeping your mind open to new ideas to get you out of that neural rut. I'm assuming I'm kind of on the right path there.
You're completely on the right path, and it's learning of some variety. It's very rare that people are finding internal motivation unless they've developed a sense of self-assessment when you talk about beliefs, I developed a belief system when I was little that if I perform a certain way, I will be accepted by the adults and the group. So I became quite performance oriented, where my effort wasn't the thing that gave me the reward, the intrinsic reward. It came from getting the result of my effort. My folks they always praised me for reward. I don't even know how I developed effort. They always praised me for effort, not outcome. And I don't know how I developed, but it was very clear. And I had somebody like you saying, Oh, little Jimmy, there's, your effort. If you look at your effort, you worked so hard. We're so thankful. And you must be proud of yourself for putting in such a great effort, Jimmy. And that you would have begun developing the chemistry in me to receive the reward of effort. And it would have been easier for me to get out of my neural rut along the way. So what shakes the table? I learned from you how to shake my table sometimes, and maybe that's enough of an incentive to get out of my rut. But what's going to shake the table and move us out of the rut? I think visiting and learning from each other and having, if I'm not safe in my workplace, to assess my neural ruts, I won't get out of my neural ruts. So the concert keeps coming together. I have to find a way to soften the force of uncertainty by facing what is causing me the uncertainty. It's the F3. I face it, I feel it, and then I move forward. I feel really uncomfortable about this. Okay, can't fix it. I'm not fixing it, but I can move forward in some way. And that starts to develop those pathways. And all the neurons that have pruned for low trust, all the neurons that are pruned for the way I use language, we can redevelop those neurons. And it's not so much that we are jumping out of a rut like a ball on a table, like the image is good. It's that we're designing a new pathway by recruiting new neurons, by micro behaviors that I can put effort in to my own wellness, psychologically, physically, and emotionally.
And the reward, people will challenge me on this, but the reward you feel from the work, the process, the journey that you went through when you look back on it, and that's why it's important to celebrate little milestones along the way. But the reward you feel from that is, to be honest, it's so much greater than the championship itself. One of the greatest epiphanies my son had at, the age of 16, well, for me too, is I said, if you study hard for any exam or work hard on a project or whatever for school, and I see you doing it, maybe ask me for help or your mother for help, I don't care what grade you get. And he's like, what? I said, yeah. I said, as long as I know that you put the inputs in to get an outcome, of some sort, like, you need to complete it. But as long as I see the inputs going in, it becomes a bit subjective to the teacher too. But it's like, I'm less worried about the grade that resulted from it than what you learned in the process. And it changed everything for him because he stopped worrying about the grade and he put more effort just into the effort part of it itself. And I think in the workplace, that is something that, once again, we need to keep professing as business owners to our employees. Don't get me wrong, you still want results. I just want to see that you're working hard. And I think everything we've talked about today, psychological safety, neural ruts, lack of trust, the uncertainty epidemic, all can be addressed through concerted effort from the different parties and just the effort to understand other people.
Right.
And the curiosity, not judgment. I'll Ted Lasso this one, but curiosity, not judgmental, right?
Yeah, curiosity, not judgmental. And you the curious learner, and what you spoke about your son, you develop a lifetime learner because the effort is rewarded, and that's what reward and recognition is about. And I know the wrapping up is so important, but can I just mention a bit about nuancing our understanding? This is another way to get out of a rut. Okay. Or something. And we've talked about how important it is to be vulnerable, and psychologically safe workplaces help us feel it's okay to be vulnerable, which draws people to each other, strengthens our organizational culture, increases productivity. There's more involvement and influence and engagement. But we've always had a problem with this idea of vulnerability. And somebody taught us, can we nuance our current understanding of vulnerability? Can you imagine, Quinn, when we were back in the day and we were that kind of a caveman and we first encountered fire, and we would have been terrified of it, and we're now drawn to it. So vulnerability is that fire. And we as humans have often, in our current context of culture, we've come to learn that it's going to hurt us being vulnerable. It's going to burn us being vulnerable. So could you imagine today if you put a campfire at the lake, you invited me and Ange up, and I walk into the back and I just lose my mind? That's scary, scary, scary. No, we've nuanced our understanding of the fire, can we do that, nuance our understanding of vulnerability? And it comes with realizing we do have an evolutionary resistance to vulnerability, like we did to fire. It can burn us like fire. We do feel a sense of weakness when we have a potential to be vulnerable. You have more power and control when I'm vulnerable than I have in that moment. And the social dominance hierarchies that have been incorporated into all of our systems are always in our frontal cortex. So when we can nuance our understanding, and I've seen people like you who share your podcast and information, softening that path to nuancing our understanding of vulnerability, where sometimes we're going to be excited for what we gain from being vulnerable, just like we are excited about what we gain from fire. And we can step forward in that safe environment and improve each other through that vulnerability.
I mean, that's really what relationships are all about. It's seeing a little bit deeper than just the surface. And I realize that historically male and female roles have been separated in the sense that females are vulnerable and show more emotion and feeling than males do, traditionally, historically. But now it's the stoic male that shows vulnerability that is really having the breakthrough, especially to other men. I think it's important for everybody to see the traditional male show that vulnerability, especially in roles of leadership. It's important to know that your leader is vulnerable, isn't completely, 100% bulletproof.
No one questions that any longer, that all of those things are part of the human condition. Can we be drawn to the warmth of the fire of vulnerability and realize that is strengthening us as opposed to burning us and making us weaker? And when we can nuance our understanding of it, really recognizing fire is going to strengthen us, and vulnerability is part of that.
What a great way to finish. I want to talk about, at the start of the show, I mentioned your history, 30 years with the fire service, the final few years as a captain. Tell me what you were doing now, because obviously you've retired from the fire service, but what have you been doing the last few years? I know you've got jimbrayshaw.com, but tell me where people can find you, who you're working with, really what you love to speak about, some of the initiatives that you have going on right now, Jim.
Certainly. Thanks for asking. Well, I've been really fortunate to work alongside Angela, my partner, my wife. We're partners in life and everything. And we together run mental health training and supports where we deliver mental health educational workshops and develop strategies for organizations so they can strengthen their teams and their organization in the mental health capacity for mental and emotional wellness. And the personal side of our business, I am involved as a speaker, as you mentioned, and it's really one of my passions now to speak about trust, how we lost it, why we lost it, how to get it back. It's really one of my passions to speak about emotionality of the human condition and strengthening the male understanding of this is how I can be emotional and the value of that. It's also quite a passion of mine to speak about improving humans to improve everything. And really that ultimate goal is when we find ways to improve in our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health with each other, we're improving relationships, we're improving sleep, kindness, support, our health and productivity. And so I've gotten great enjoyment about speaking about what's improving humans. So that maybe answers your question enough on that. And thank you for asking that. We did get to touch on some of the passions here, and I appreciate you inviting me so much, Quinn, to be part of your Efforts Over Results podcast.
Thank you. After the coffee we had a few weeks ago, I absolutely knew I had to have you on the show, and I hope the people that watch this enjoyed it. I love what you speak to. I think it's extremely relevant and important today. This is not just an employment thing. This can be applied to all arenas of life. And so I highly recommend, if you're looking for a public speaker to speak to any of the topics that Jim and I, touched upon today, to go to jimbrayshaw.com. You can see the videos there, and you can reach him at the email address that's at the top of the screen right above him.
Quinn, thanks for making this so easy and enjoyable.